Now, Nikita Hand won her rape civil action against Conor McGregor on Friday. So what is next for both parties? I'm joined on the line by Frank Graney, Newstalk's courts correspondent. Frank, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Not long after the jury found against him on Friday, Conor McGregor went online to share his intentions to appeal. Do we know if that's in train? And if so, what are the likely grounds of appeal?
Yeah, he quickly took to X to announce his intention to appeal. He made a couple of posts to that effect, but as far as I can see, they've since been removed. Um, to bring an appeal, he, like anybody else in this situation, would have to lodge paperwork with the court within 28 days of the order being made against him. So the clock is ticking in that regard. It started ticking after the jury came back with its verdict on Friday afternoon. As far as I know, that hasn't been done yet. But again, the verdict was only delivered a little before 5 o'clock on Friday, so it's unlikely to have happened before the office closed up for the weekend, and it only opened again this morning in the past few hours. So we will, of course, keep a close eye on developments there. In terms of his grounds of appeal, they will obviously be for he and his legal team to thrash out. Those reasons will also have to be submitted to the court in advance of a potential challenge. And to be successful before the Court of Appeal, Conor McGregor will have to convince the judges that he essentially didn't get a fair trial. In most cases that involve challenging a piece of contested evidence, for example, that went to the jury, or the opposite, challenging a piece that did go to the jury that perhaps they felt shouldn't have. We're all familiar with legal argument where legal issues need to be thrashed out in the absence of the jury, and where there is conflict between legal teams in relation to evidence or other aspects of the running of a trial, the judge steps in, acts as a referee, makes decisions, having heard from both sides. The outcomes of those legal arguments are generally the main focus of subsequent appeals. I should say that Conor McGregor isn't entitled to bring an appeal just because he may not like or accept the jury's verdict, which I think it's fair to say he clearly doesn't. His challenge will have to have merit in terms of a legal challenge based solely on the law. So he certainly seems eager to bring an appeal, but time will tell whether or not he chooses to do so.
And the question of what he can challenge illegally. I mean, for example, the judge's directions to the jury. Would that be something that would be typical in a challenge in civil cases?
Yeah, that is often the case, and that's often the bones of an appeal, both in the criminal courts and the civil courts. It's a very important function of the judge when it comes to the closing stages of a trial, where he or she will sum up the evidence that the jurors have heard and will also direct them on the law and the various relevant legal principles that they will have to abide by through their deliberations. So if there are any issues in relation to that, and both sides in any case in general, but also in this case, when the jury does begin its deliberations, both sides are given an opportunity to make requisitions to the judge. You know, they would have been scribbling notes as Mr. Justice Alex Owens was directing the jurors on various issues. They would have made those requisitions to him. The jurors would have been brought back, and the judge made ruling in relation to those requisitions, and he would have made further points to the jurors on the back of those. But yeah, you're right. That is often a feature of an appeal where there may be misdirections by the judge.
Because, you know, when we're looking at the telly or in the movies, the judge, you get the two counsel for defence and prosecution summing up, then the judge sums up, and it appears there's nothing else. But you're saying it's a much more kind of toing and froing process than what we see on the telly.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's fair to say. I mean, legal argument would take place in the absence of the jury, and I must say this was a relatively smooth trial in that sense. There wasn't an awful lot of legal argument that wouldn't have concerned the jury, but obviously they were sent out from time to time where legal issues were thrashed out in their absence, and they wouldn't have been aware of what was said.
Now, what about the DPP's original decision not to bring criminal charges? Is that likely to be re-examined in the light of the outcome of the civil case, or are they two separate kingdoms, if you like, the civil and the criminal?
They are two entirely separate arenas. You're comparing apples with oranges there. I mean, fundamentally, the standard of proof bringing these cases is substantially and significantly different. Obviously, if a case is being tried before a criminal court, it must be proven by the Director of Public Prosecution on behalf of the people of Ireland beyond a reasonable doubt, a very, very high threshold, obviously mirroring the potential consequences for an accused person if they are found guilty in criminal proceedings. It's a much lower threshold, as we know, in the civil courts, where, take this case for example, a jury is presented with two versions of events: Nikita Hand's account of what happened in the Beacon Hotel almost 6 years ago now, and Conor McGregor's. They were fundamentally different for obvious reasons, and the jurors were being asked in their deliberations to consider which of those two versions of events was most likely or more probable. On the balance of probabilities, that's the test. So as to whether or not this is going to influence the DPP's decision, I mean, Nikita Hand was very disappointed, obviously, and very upset that criminal charges were not brought. But she got some detailed reasoning in relation to why those charges were not brought. And I suppose going to the core of that is that standard of proof that the DPP felt that there was insufficient evidence and no probable likelihood of a criminal conviction if they did bring charges.
Now, if you get testimony from various witnesses and it turns out the jury don't believe that testimony, are there any consequences for uh, those people who give evidence based on the inference that a jury has taken that they were not telling the truth?
I think what you may be getting at there is the case involving the second named defendant, if I'm correct, James Lawrence. Clearly, Conor McGregor wasn't the only one on trial, but the jury didn't find in favour of Nikita Hand in relation to her claims about James Lawrence. And just briefly, the case against him was that he had assaulted her also in the hotel. He had claimed that he had consensual sex with Nikita Hand after Conor McGregor had left the hotel. She brought this claim, claiming that he had raped her. So, you know, there is some suggestion out there that he may have an avenue of bringing a case of defamation against her. The testimony that she gave at trial, like any other witness, is protected by absolute privilege. And also the statute, in terms of the statute of limitations for bringing a case like that, has passed. I think the window closes after 1 year. So, you know, in relation to bringing those types of proceedings, there are obviously very high obstacles that he would find in his way.
Now, the court is going to sit again later in the week to deal with costs, and there have been some suggestions that despite winning her case against Conor McGregor, Nikita Hand could find herself out of pocket, and that's to do with the second case.
Yeah, yeah. James Lawrence comes into the answer in relation to that question. You know, Nikita Hand won her case against Conor on Friday, but let's not forget that she also lost her case against James Lawrence. And you would be forgiven for not remembering that she sued the second man for alleged assault too. Such was, I suppose, the spotlight that was on Conor McGregor throughout proceedings. I do remember an occasion where a witness had given their direct evidence, had been cross-examined by the barrister representing Conor McGregor, and as that witness was getting up to return to their seat, John Fitzgerald, who was representing James Lawrence, took to his feet and he said, look, you'd be forgiven for not realising that there is another person on trial here. And he had a few questions for that witness, and they resumed their seat. He again had claimed that he had had consensual sex with her after Conor McGregor left the hotel. She said she'd no memory of it. She sued him for damages. She wasn't successful in relation to that. Now, the general rule in civil cases is that costs follow the event, which is a somewhat flowery way of saying the loser pays. And on the face of it, Nikita Hand should be entitled to her costs against Conor McGregor. She won her costs against him, but not against James Lawrence for the reasons that I've just outlined. The court will sit again on Thursday to determine who pays what. But if that turns out to be the case, Ms. Hand may not have much, if any change at all, out of the compensation, just under $250,000 that she was awarded against Conor McGregor. The stakes when it comes to civil litigation couldn't be higher when it comes to that financial burden. They can be a very costly exercise for whoever loses, and I suspect that that's one of the reasons you don't see cases like this being brought before a jury too often. I should say, actually, just on that point, that Nikita Hand says she has been at pains to point out that this wasn't about the money, that this is about vindication, especially after the director decided not to bring criminal charges. She felt that this was the only road to vindication for her. And while she didn't get anything close to what she was looking for, she was looking for 750 grand for rehousing and another €1 million for loss of earnings. You know, €250,000 is still a lot of money, but it's nowhere near that, 1.7 million. But her relief and her delight in relation to Friday's outcome was clear for all to see afterwards.
And do you have any, I suppose, insight into why the payment was relatively on the low side compared to what was sought?
No, and I suppose the reason we don't is because that was entirely in the hands of the jurors. They once they had found in favour of Nikita Hand in relation to her case against Conor McGregor, they then went on to assess and toward damages, and they were directed in relation to that at some length by the judge. They essentially had to assess damages in four different categories: general damages, special damages, aggravated damages, and punitive damages. And they only actually awarded her damages for the first two there, general and special, 60 grand for general and the rest then on special. General damages are awarded for personal injury and hurt. Examples would include the pain and the suffering, the emotional distress of all of that, loss of enjoyment of life as a result of what happened in the Beacon Hotel. Special damages then are a little bit easier to calculate. They would have heard evidence from an actuary about her loss of earnings to date, her potential loss of earnings going into the future. She had ambitions and dreams to go on in her career as a hair colourist, to potentially open up her own salon at some point. But she was looking for €1 million. I think she got about €188,000. So again, significantly less than what she was looking for. Now, the jurors were also directed, and they could have been minded to turn their attention to aggravated and punitive damages. Aggravated damages recognise additional harm caused by things like malicious conduct. For example, a refusal to apologise, an assassination of her character, humiliation caused by the defendant's behaviour, prolonged publicity, re-victimisation, things like that. And then punitive damages, they're awarded to punish the defendant and to deter similar wrongdoing. And this marks, I suppose, the jury's disapproval of a person's conduct. They're above and beyond compensatory damages. They're not based on the plaintiff's actual losses. But as I said, when they were asked how much they awarded in relation to those, they said nil. So it was just the general and the special. And I suppose that's maybe a roundabout way of explaining their thinking. But clearly we don't know how they arrived at those numbers when they were deliberating.
Frank Graney, Newstalk's courts correspondent. Frank, thank you very much for joining us. Now, if you or someone you know has been impacted by this content, you can contact the Rape Crisis Centre on their 24-hour helpline, 1-800-778888.